single dad hired by CEO. But what her daughter whispered to the bunny left him shattered. They always say the night reveals things daylight tries to hide. And on this night, somewhere outside Chicago, it wasn't the sirens or shadows that haunted Thomas Reed. It was the silence in the back seat of his car, and the eyes of a little girl who wouldn't speak. Thomas, a retired Marine turned private driver, was used to strange late-night requests. But this one, it came with no name, no pleasantries, just a ping on his phone, an address in the upscale neighborhood of Stonewater Lane, and a cold voice from dispatch. Client needs immediate transport, VIP clearance, no questions. By now, Thomas knew better than to ask. At 12:07 a.m., he pulled up in front of a massive house. White pillars, manicured lawn windows glowing faintly, but offering no warmth. On the steps stood a woman in her mid-30s. Perfect posture, sleek pantsuit expression, carved from granite. "You're the driver?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. I'm the one who hired you. We'll drive when I say, no conversation." He gave a slight nod, but before she could move, the front door creaked open, and out stepped a small child, maybe 6, barefoot. Her long brown hair slightly tangled, dragging a gray stuffed rabbit by one ear. The contrast between the two was jarring. Thomas softened. "Hey there, sweetheart." She doesn't respond to strangers. The woman cut in not harshly, just as a fact. "Go back inside, Haley." The little girl turned quietly, disappearing into the shadows of the house. The door clicked shut with an eerie gentleness. And then the woman simply said, "Drive." They rode through streets washed in fog. Buildings slipped past like ghosts. Soft jazz hummed from the radio, but it did little to warm the atmosphere. Thomas adjusted the rearview mirror. The woman, whose name he still didn't know, stared out the window like it held answers she couldn't afford to say aloud. Then, in a tone barely audible, she whispered, "If a child doesn't speak in a house full of chandeliers, don't blame the dark." The sentence hung in the air like the weight of a confession. Thomas didn't press. He'd seen that kind of silence before. Back when his daughter Emily stopped speaking after the accident. Back when the world became too sharp to name out loud. When the woman finally gave him her name, Rachel Blackwood, it wasn't a courtesy. It was a boundary. Thomas dropped her off at the Lakeside Regent Hotel at 1:14 a.m. She stepped out precise and emotionless. No thank you. No good night. And yet in the seat where Haley had sat hours earlier, one tiny thing remained. A single gray thread. Thomas picked it up, rolled it between his fingers. He'd seen combat death despair, but that small forgotten thread, it weighed more than a battlefield. Because when a child leaves behind part of what makes them feel safe, you know something's wrong. And as he sat in his car gripping the wheel, Thomas Reed made a silent promise to no one but himself. "I don't know what this little girl is running from, but I'll be the one who doesn't run away." Thomas returned to the house on Stonewater Lane the next morning at exactly 7 a.m. The iron gates opened before he could buzz in. Rachel Blackwood was already outside, waiting, still flawless, hair pinned, expression unreadable. She stepped into the car without a word, but there was no sign of Haley. The house behind her felt eerily still, like someone had muted life itself. Thomas didn't ask. He drove. First to a corporate boardroom downtown, then to a construction site. Rachel moved through meetings with the efficiency of a machine, shaking hands, giving orders, always in control. She barely acknowledged him, except to say, "Wait here or take me to the next location." At the final stop, an investor brunch in a luxury hotel ballroom, Rachel returned to the car with a smudge on her sleeve and eyes just slightly too glossy. Thomas risked a question. "Tough meeting?" She hesitated. One of the board members called Haley a marketing tactic, said she adds emotional credibility to my image. She scoffed. I should have dumped my wine in his lap. "Did you—" "No," she muttered. "I just smiled." Then, accidentally, tipped his glass over. Thomas smiled, a quiet, knowing one. "Do you have kids, Miss Blackwood?" She didn't look at him, but her voice changed. Less guarded, more human. "One, Haley. She's 6, bright, gifted, but quiet." A pause. "I'm her mother. That's all I am. That's all she lets me be." Thomas nodded slowly. "I have a daughter too, Emily. She used to talk a lot. Then, One day she didn't. Sometimes silence isn't something you fix. It's something you sit with. Rachel looked at him in the mirror. For the first time, her eyes didn't just see him. They registered him. She stares at me like I'm the moon trying to explain gravity. She said, I feed her, clothe her, enroll her in the best schools. But the silence, her voice cracked ever so slightly. The silence is louder than anything I say. That night after dropping her off, Thomas turned to check the back seat. There, nestled in the corner, was the stuffed rabbit, the same one Haley had clutched with such intensity the night before. It was small, gray, one eye, missing one ear, almost detached. Thomas picked it up gently, turning it over in his hands. It wasn't just a toy. It was armor, the only thing Haley trusted enough to hold. Back in his apartment, he set the rabbit on his kitchen counter next to a photo of Emily. She was about Haley's age in the picture, smiling wide, 2 front teeth missing. Thomas poured a cup of coffee he didn't drink and stared at the rabbit for hours. That night, he couldn't sleep. The image of Haley barefoot and wordless clung to him like smoke. The next morning, he returned the rabbit. Rachel met him at the door, surprised but not entirely displeased. She'll want that, she said simply, taking it without ceremony. But when Thomas turned to leave, he glanced up toward the second-story window. A tiny face peeked through the curtains. And in that fleeting moment, Haley smiled. Not big, not long, just a flicker. But it was enough. The silence was beginning to crack. That Saturday, the skies turned gray before noon. Thick clouds folding over the city like a quilt too heavy for spring. Thomas didn't have any scheduled pickups. Still, his gut pulled him back to Stonewater Lane. Rachel wasn't home. The housekeeper, a quiet woman named Miriam, answered the door. She's running errands, she said. Told me to mind the place. Haley's in her room. Is she okay? Thomas asked carefully. Miriam hesitated, eyes dropping to the floor. She's quiet today. Quieter than usual. That sentence alone was enough to make Thomas's chest tighten. He asked if he could wait. Miriam nodded without question, like she knew he was the only person the child might allow near. He sat on the edge of the staircase, sipping from a bottle of water, trying to calm the strange storm in his chest. That's when he heard it, a creak from down the hallway, a soft scuff of movement. He followed it gently, cautiously, like approaching a bird afraid to fly. Haley's door was cracked open. Inside, the lights were dim. Books were scattered around the floor like fallen leaves. But the bed, empty. His heart dropped. "Haley!" he called, barely louder than a whisper. No response. Then something caught his eye, a tiny glint from the far corner of the room near the nightstand. A closet. He knelt down and opened it slowly. At first it looked ordinary. Jacket, shoes, a folded blanket. But beneath that, a flashlight, a bottle of water, a baggie of cookies, a small pillow, a nest, a planned hiding spot. Then, movement. In the corner, curled tight in the shadows, was Haley, rabbit in one hand, eyes wide and frozen. Thomas dropped to his knees, voice cracking. "Haley, it's okay. I'm not here to take you anywhere. I just wanted to make sure you're safe." Still no words. But she didn't run. Minutes passed. Then she whispered, "This is my safe place. The closet listens better than people." Thomas closed his eyes, briefly steadying himself. "You don't have to hide from me," he said softly. "I'm not hiding from you," she replied. "I'm hiding from her when she talks to the mirror." Thomas blinked. The mirror. Haley nodded. "She yells at it, says it lies, but sometimes it talks back." It was the kind of thing that would sound strange from any other child, but from Haley it landed with terrifying clarity. "Does she hurt you, Haley?" he asked gently. She didn't answer at first. Then, not with her hands, just her face. The words hit him harder than a scream. She went on, "She calls me the ghost. Says I float around the house like I'm not really there. Says I look like someone she can't forget. That's why she built me the closet. Even ghosts need somewhere to disappear." Thomas reached out slowly, placing his hand on the floor between them, open and still. "You're not a ghost, Haley," he said. "You're a little girl, and I see you." She stared at his hand. Then, for the first time, she moved toward it. She placed the rabbit between them. "His name is Safe," she whispered. "But I think he needs help." Thomas smiled, tears threatening the corners of his eyes. "We all do, sweetheart. We all do." He didn't touch her, didn't try to pull her out of the closet. He simply sat there beside her, in the dark, in the silence, until she was ready to move. Because sometimes the first way to help a child leave the dark is to sit in it with them. The next morning, Thomas made a call he hadn't expected to make in years. It rang twice before a gravelly voice picked up. "Reed, haven't heard from you since Fort Bragg." "Hey," Marcus, Thomas said. "I need a favor. Off the record." There was a pause. "Then I'm listening. I need to know everything you can find on Rachel Blackwood. Background checks, sealed files, name, changes, psychological evaluations. Discreet." "Is this about the kid?" Thomas's silence was the answer. Marcus sighed. "You'll have something by morning." Thomas hung up, the weight of it sinking in. This wasn't just a job anymore. That afternoon, Rachel called again for a late pickup. No sign of Haley this time. Just Rachel's sunglasses, hiding tired eyes, voice clipped. "She's staying home," she said, sliding into the back seat. "It's been a rough day." Thomas hesitated. "If you ever need help with her—" "I don't," she snapped. Then softer. "She needs structure, routine. That's what stability looks like." "No," Thomas said gently. "That's what silence looks like." Rachel's jaw tightened. "She's fine. She's hiding," he replied. "And I think you are too." For once, Rachel didn't respond, just stared out the window like it held a version of herself she couldn't face. That night, Thomas sat at his kitchen table, with Safe the stuffed rabbit on the counter. He'd spent the last hour sewing a fresh stitch along the toy's belly seam, using a kit Emily had once used for school crafts. But this time the stitch wasn't just for repair. It was for something more. Inside, he placed a tiny audio device, barely bigger than a thumbtack. Voice activated, battery protected. It wasn't to spy. It was to protect, because sometimes people believe files before they believe children. The next day, Thomas returned Safe to Haley, wrapped in soft tissue paper. "Looks better," she said, clutching it to her chest. "But still the same heart." He smiled. Just a few new stitches. That night, he parked near Stonewater Lane and waited. From his laptop, he connected to the live audio feed embedded inside the rabbit. The house was quiet at first. Then a sharp voice. "Rachel, stop humming. Humming is for babies." A pause. Then Haley's barely audible voice. "I didn't mean to." "You never mean to," Rachel snapped. "But your meaning doesn't matter. Only your silence does." There was a clatter, something heavy set down, maybe a glass. Then footsteps, a door, silence. Thomas sat back, fists clenched, not in surprise, but in bitter recognition. He'd heard that tone before, not in a mother's voice, in boot camp, in interrogation rooms, in the mouths of people who needed control more than connection. He hit save on the recording labeled the file and tucked his phone into his pocket. The next morning, when he picked Haley up for school, she handed him something folded small, another drawing. It showed a tree with a swing, two stick figures beneath it, one tall, one small. The tall one had lines around the hands, warmth or protection. Above them, the words, "If I fall, he catches." Thomas stared at it, swallowed hard, then knelt beside her. "You did good," he said. "Real brave." She looked up at him. "What happens when she comes back?" Thomas didn't rush his answer. He didn't sugarcoat it. This time he said quietly, "We'll be ready." Because in that moment, Thomas wasn't just a driver. He wasn't even just a father. He was a shield. And shields don't walk away. They stay until the storm ends. By Tuesday evening, Marcus delivered the file. They met at an old gas station off Highway 27, the kind of place with cracked pavement and flickering lights. Discreet enough for secrets, quiet enough for truths. Marcus stepped out of his Jeep, handed Thomas a slim folder. "You were right to worry," he said. Her name wasn't always Rachel Blackwood. Thomas flipped open the file. Born Rachel Ann Parker, legally changed her name at 21. No known father, mother, institutionalized twice, records sealed, hospital notes flagged for emotional dissociation, self-harm trauma. Marcus showed him a photo, grainy black and white, a young Rachel, hollow-eyed, wrists bandaged. She disappeared for 3 years, re-emerged as a hedge fund analyst. No therapy, just ambition. "What about Haley's dad?" Thomas asked. Marcus hesitated. No birth certificate filed, no paternity claims, but he passed one last page, a handwritten note from a clinic intake form during Rachel's pregnancy. "Child is mine, entirely mine, no father involved." Thomas exhaled slowly. The weight of it wasn't just about Rachel anymore. It was about how pain passes itself down like an heirloom when no one interrupts the cycle. That night, Rachel hosted a private dinner party, polished silverware, white tablecloths, crystal glasses. It was for clients, donors, and PR optics. Thomas was invited, oddly unexpectedly. "You clean up well," Rachel said when she saw him. Her voice was smooth, forced, like someone trying to imitate kindness. "And you deflect well," he replied, matching her tone. "Must we always spar? Only if you keep pretending silence is the same thing as peace." She didn't answer. At dinner, Haley sat stiffly between Rachel and an executive. She didn't eat, just pushed peas around her plate and kept Safe tucked between her side and the chair arm like a barrier. Then Rachel leaned down and said something that turned the room ice cold. "When I was your age, I didn't get stuffed animals. I got silence. And silence teaches you how to survive." Haley didn't respond, but Thomas did. "You're not supposed to teach a child how to survive you," he said calmly but firm. "You're supposed to make sure she never has to." Forks paused, glasses clinked, no one breathed. Rachel's hands curled in her lap. Her knuckles turned white, but her face never cracked. That night, long after the guests were gone, Haley appeared at Thomas's door. She held out another drawing. This one was different, 2 figures under an open sky, one small one kneeling, no buildings, no shadows, just space. At the bottom, in block letters, "He stayed anyway." Thomas dropped to one knee, meeting her eye. "I'll always stay," he whispered, "even when it's hard, even when it hurts, especially then." Haley blinked. Then, in the softest voice he'd ever heard, she asked, "Do you think Safe believes that?" Thomas reached out, touched the rabbit's stitched ear. "I think Safe's starting to." She nodded, tucked the drawing into his coat pocket, turned to leave. And just before disappearing down the hall, she whispered, "I hear you too." Thomas stood in that hallway long after she was gone, hand over his chest, drawing in his pocket, because once a child trusts you with her truth, you protect it like breath, like fire, like life itself. The morning of the custody hearing arrived draped in gray. No sun, no bird song, just that heavy kind of quiet that feels like the world's holding its breath. Thomas adjusted his tie for the 5th time in the courthouse parking lot. He wasn't used to suits, not since Emily's mother passed, and definitely not for a courtroom that could change the life of a child he'd only known for a few weeks, but felt responsible for in a way he couldn't explain. Haley stood beside him, clutching Safe under one arm, her other hand wrapped tight around his fingers. She wore a navy blue dress and pink sneakers. Her hair was pulled back with a butterfly clip, one she told him used to belong to her grandmother. Rachel approached a moment later, no heels, no tailored suit, just a soft wool coat and a nervous look in her eyes that no amount of corporate polish could hide. She didn't walk ahead. She walked beside them. Inside the courtroom buzzed with quiet energy. Child welfare officials, lawyers, a judge with tired eyes and a calm voice. Everything felt clinical, neutral, but charged. Thomas was called first. He stepped up, voice steady, but hands trembling as he held up Haley's drawings, her silent confessions drawn in crayon and fear. "She didn't tell me with words," he said. "She told me through hiding spots, through pictures, through the way she looked at Safe like he was the only one listening." He paused, voice lowering. "I'm not her father, but I've been a soldier. I've guarded lives, and nothing has ever felt more sacred than protecting hers." He didn't speak Rachel's name in anger. He didn't accuse. He didn't dramatize. "She's not evil," he said, looking at the judge. "She's injured, but she's showing up, and sometimes that's where everything starts." The judge nodded, then called Rachel. She stepped forward slower than usual, unfolded a piece of paper from her coat pocket. "I wasn't taught how to mother," she began, her voice barely audible. "I was taught how to survive." She looked down, collected herself, then continued. "I passed down silence because it was the only thing I knew. But lately, I've seen what love looks like. It looks like a man who didn't have to stay, but did. A child who still reaches out even after being ignored. And a bunny, stitched back together because someone believed broken things are still worth saving." Her voice cracked. "I'm not asking to win. I'm asking to try." Then it was Haley's turn. The judge knelt down beside the witness stand so she wouldn't have to climb. She stood on a small step stool, hands gripping the rail, Safe tucked under one arm. "Do you want to say anything?" the judge asked kindly. Haley looked at Thomas, then at Rachel, and with a clarity only children seem to possess, she said, "I want to live with both of them. One knows how to listen. The other is learning." The room was still. Even the judge leaned back in his chair like the air had shifted. A few minutes later, the ruling was read. Joint guardianship, mandatory therapy, monitored co-parenting plan. Not perfect, but possible. And sometimes possibility is where hope lives. Outside, the first bit of sun broke through the clouds. Just a thin sliver of gold across the courthouse steps. Haley looked up at it, then at the two adults flanking her. She didn't say anything. She just squeezed their hands. And that was enough, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't standing alone. The weeks that followed weren't filled with fireworks or grand declarations. Healing, as Thomas would come to understand, didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly, like rain that soaks the ground before you even realize it's falling. Haley still didn't talk much, but the silence changed. It wasn't sharp anymore. It wasn't afraid. It became gentle. She began to hum again, soft tunes tuneless sometimes, like the echoes of songs she once knew, while brushing her hair, while swinging her legs at the breakfast table, sometimes while drawing, always with Safe beside her, patched and quietly proud. The first time she hummed in front of Rachel, the woman flinched, not out of anger, but from some unfamiliar ache in her chest, and instead of shutting it down, she listened. A few days later, something even more unexpected happened. Rachel hummed back. It was barely a melody, a single shaky note, but Haley noticed. And she didn't stop humming. By the third week, their home had changed. Not dramatically. The curtains didn't magically flutter with light, but the air was different. The cold edge had softened. The walls no longer echoed, they absorbed. Rachel started showing up differently, not just physically, but emotionally. She paused more before speaking, checked herself when frustration swelled, asked questions instead of giving orders. Thomas watched it all with cautious hope. One evening, he found Rachel sitting on the porch, a steaming mug between her hands. "I found something," she said quietly, motioning him over. Inside her study was a small worn envelope, yellowed edges. Her name, Rachel Ann Parker, written in a slanted, almost frantic hand. "My mother wrote this," she said. "I found it after she passed. I was too angry to read it, until now." She handed it to Thomas. He read it slowly. "Rachel, I know I taught you more fear than love. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope you find what I couldn't. There's a softness in you. I saw it once when you held your breath to save a baby bird that fell from the window. Let that part grow, even if it hurts, especially when it hurts." Thomas looked up. Rachel's face was unreadable, but her voice cracked. "I hated her for so long," she whispered. "But maybe she was trying to tell me something. Even back then." Thomas placed a hand on the letter and looked at her. "Pain passed down becomes legacy," he said. "But pain faced, that becomes healing." Later that week, Haley asked if she could sleep in the guest room. Why, Rachel asked gently. "It feels safer," Haley said. "Less memories." Rachel nodded. "Then let's make new ones." They picked out new sheets with constellations and glow-in-the-dark stars, a nightlight shaped like a moon, a stuffed pillow shaped like a fox. That night, as Thomas tucked her in, Haley asked, "Does starting over mean forgetting?" "No," he said, "it means remembering differently." She seemed to think about that, then whispered, "If I talk to someone at school, will it help other kids too?" Thomas felt something swell in his chest. It might, Haley. It just might change everything. In the next room, Rachel sat at her desk, flipping through the letter again. This time, she wasn't afraid of the words. She was ready to live them. Spring arrived like a breath the house had been holding for months. One morning, sunlight streamed through the Mercer home with unusual warmth, catching flecks of dust in the air like glitter. Haley stood in front of the mirror, not to talk to it, but to adjust her dress. Today was the spring showcase at her elementary school. Parents were invited. There would be poems, short stories, maybe even a clumsy group song. But for Haley, this wasn't just another school event. It was her debut. Thomas waited near the car, watching through the front window, as Rachel knelt to fix the clasp on Haley's shoes. Their hands moved slowly, as if both were afraid that this quiet moment might shatter. Haley looked up. "Will you both be there?" Rachel nodded. "Wouldn't miss it." Thomas added, "You've got the loudest cheering section in the building. At the school, parents packed the cafeteria turned auditorium. Folding chairs creaked, phones buzzed, the lights flickered once before dimming. Then came the voice on the loudspeaker, next up, Haley Blackwood reading her original story. Rachel's breath hitched. Thomas reached over and gently squeezed her hand. Haley stepped onto the small wooden platform. She adjusted the microphone. Her dress brushed her knees. Safe was clutched tightly under her arm. She cleared her throat, then began to read. This is a story about a bunny named Safe. He thought he was just a toy, but then he realized something special. He was the heart of a whole new beginning. Because love doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to stay. There was a beat of silence, then thunderous applause. Rachel covered her mouth, tears streaming, silently but freely. Thomas blinked fast, failing to stop his own. Haley smiled, broad, proud, unafraid. She looked directly at them, not through them. At them, afterward, while kids collected juice boxes and cookies, Haley tugged on Thomas's sleeve. Can I tell you something? Anything. I know what love sounds like now. He knelt down. What does it sound like? She held up 3 fingers. It sounds like 2 chairs pulled up to the dinner table. It sounds like someone humming back. And it sounds like... She paused. It sounds like staying... Later that night, she curled up on the couch between Rachel and Thomas. Safe, nestled close, as always. Rachel tucked the blanket around all 3 of them. Do you know what I wished for today? Haley asked, eyes already heavy. That's what Thomas asked, that nothing ever goes back to how it was before, even if we mess up sometimes. Rachel kissed her forehead. We will mess up, Thomas added, but now we clean it up. Together. Haley yawned. Good, she murmured. Then I'm keeping you both. And just like that, the room didn't feel like a house anymore. It felt like home. Sometimes the stories that change us most don't come wrapped in noise or drama. Sometimes they begin with silence. A little girl who whispered to a rabbit instead of speaking to the world. A man who listened not to fix, but to understand. And a mother who had to unlearn everything she thought love was, so she could become the mother her child needed. This wasn't a fairy tale. There was no magical ending, no flawless redemption. Just people, damaged, determined, and deeply human, choosing to stay. And staying, that's what changed everything. Not every home begins with a front door and matching keys. Sometimes it starts with a moment, a single thread of trust, a stitched-up bunny, a hum shared between a mother and daughter who are learning to speak the same language. Maybe that's the lesson this story leaves behind. That love isn't loud, it's consistent. It shows up, it listens, it holds space when others turn away. If you've ever felt like Haley, small, unheard, tucked into a corner where the world can't reach you, know this. There are people who will see you. There are people who will wait with you, and one day you'll step out of the dark and say what she did. I think I know what love sounds like. It sounds like staying. Thank you for watching this story. If it moved, you let it remind you that healing isn't linear, but it is possible, and it begins always with one person choosing to stay. Until next time, take care of each other. And remember, sometimes staying is the bravest thing you can do.